Here's my top tips for sewing stretch fabric. I know it can seem a little bit daunting and overwhelming, but don't worry, I'm going to show you how to get a professional finish. Hi, I'm Emma from Studio 77, and on this video I'm going to take you through my top tips for sewing stretch. I've been making creature costumes since 2002 and I've got a lot of experience of working with stretches and lycra fabrics. Tip number one is to always pre-wash your fabric. Stretch fabric can obviously come in so many different styles and different rates of elastane and spandex within them, so it's important that you pre-wash them so that then once you've made your garment it's not going to shrink again. You should always measure for stretch. When you're making a project, it will have within the project what kind of stretch is allowed for that project. So for example, on the t-shirt pattern that I made, and I'll link to that if you're interested, it has a minimum of 10% stretch. So you just want to check that your fabric will allow for that. When it comes to choosing your fabric as well for your pattern, you want to check whether it's two-way or four-way stretch. So stretch fabrics can either stretch from left to right or top to bottom, or they can be four-way stretch, so that will stretch in both directions. Now ideally when you're using stretch fabrics you should use an overlocker or a serger. Now I know not everyone's going to have one of those, and in time you might want to get one, but as a beginner sewist you're just going to want to use your regular machine. I totally get that. So I really recommend getting a walking foot. This is a great piece of kit. It just goes onto your sewing machine just like your normal foot would do. Just check when you're getting one that you're getting one for your brand of sewing machine. And all it does is that you've got the teeth on the bottom of the machine that you can see, and then the walking foot has kind of teeth at the top, so it's pulling the fabric through at the same speed, the top and the bottom layer at the same speed. It's really great for stretch because it means that that top layer of stretch isn't being squished and pulled out of kind of stretch or out of placement, and it means that you're going to get a nicer, flatter seam. Now the other thing when you're sewing stretch as well, you should always use any kind of zigzag stitch. Now most machines will have a lightning bolt stitch, which is that stitch that's got slightly off of, looks a bit like a straight stitch but is slightly off, so of course it looks like a lightning bolt. You can also use a zigzag stitch, a 3-step zigzag stitch, or an overcast stitch as well. An overcast stitch is great if you don't have an overlocker and you just want to finish those edges. But the other thing with stretch fabrics is you don't actually need to finish those edges. Those edges, they won't fray, they might curl in time, which you might not like, which is another good reason to do an overcast stitch, but it's not going to fray. Your project is not going to come apart. Some machines also have a stretch stitch, and this is a stitch that goes forwards and then it will go back two, or forwards two and back once. And this is to give the thread a bit more room so that when you pull it, the thread's got a little bit of space to go to and it will move with the fabric, it will stretch with the fabric. Now another thing you cannot miss when you're working with stretch fabrics is you really need to use the right needle. Now ideally this would be a stretch needle, but you could try a ballpoint needle, and sometimes, and I do not know why, but sometimes a universal needle will actually be the best, and I don't know why it is. It's just one of those odd things. Another thing you need to be really sure of is that you don't pull your fabrics through the machine. If you do, you're going to pull your seam out of stretch, out of placement, and you're going to get a bit of fluting, which is not ideal. Sewing in zips into a stretch garment can be super tricky, and as part of my work in my costume world I have to sew in a lot of stretch zips. The best way to do that is to tack in the zip first. It's super important that you do that, especially as a beginner sewer. So just tack those zips in and you won't have as much trouble. A twin needle can be a great way to finish off your project. What the twin needle is going to do is you need to thread it through, so you need to have 2 threads in the top of your machine, and then obviously your bobbin as well underneath, and then you're going to sew it using your straight stitch, which goes against, I know what I said about only using a zigzag or a lightning bolt or a stretch stitch, but you actually are going to use a straight stitch with your twin needle, and this is going to sew along, giving you that really nice cover stitch look which is what you'll find on your professionally made garments. Underneath, it's going to create a kind of zigzag, and that's going to give it the stretch. It just makes a really nice finish on your projects. It's worth noting, if you are going to use a twin needle as well, you just want to check your tension. Because it's got that zigzag underneath, your tension could go awry. To stop the edge of your work fluting, which is when it kind of goes all wibbly wobbly, no one likes that, a great technique is to fold it over once rather than twice. Like I say, your fabric's not going to fray, so you don't need to worry about that, but folding it over once just means that you're not going to pull it out of stretch, out of whack quite as much as if you fold it over twice and then stitch it. And finally, my top tip for sewing stretch, a little bonus tip, is that once you've done your project, especially if it's a hemline, you just want to press it over after. It's going to pull all those elastic fibres back in and just make a really nice finish. It's going to make that curve really nice on your project. I really hope you found this video useful. I'm going to link to some other videos on the screen right now that I think you're going to love. Please don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.